Hello, health lovers. So it's your cute student nurse V, and today on health episode we are going to be talking about the female reproductive system. So, what is the female reproductive system? Remember, in the organization of life, we have cells makes up tissues, groups of tissues makes up organs, and groups of organs makes up system. So now that has given us the answer to what the system is all about. Now, the female reproductive system is a group of organs or structures that are connected to each other or working together to be able to produce egg, which is the ova, aid fertilization, that is fusion of the sperm, the nucleus in the sperm with the nucleus from the ovum, and also enable pregnancy and childbirth. Now, that takes us to the divisions of the female reproductive system. So the female reproductive system is divided into two. We have the external genitalia and we have the internal genitalia. Now let's talk about the external genitalia. Now the external genitalia is collectively called the vulva. Now we have it comprises of some structures. So the structures, we have the clitoris, we have the hymen, we have the vestibular glands, we have the labia majora, and we have the labia minora. Now let's talk about the labia majora. Now, these labia majora are two large folds that forms the boundary of the vulva. Now, it contains many sebaceous glands. And you know what sebaceous gland is for? Sebaceous gland secretes sebum, which is an oily substance that helps to lubricate and moisturize the skin. So, it contains many sebaceous glands as well as the anterior part of the labia majora points towards the symphysis pubis, that is the pubic bone. Then the posterior wall of the labia majora merges together with the perineum. So what is the perineum? The perineum forms the base, that is, should I say, our buttocks area. So it merges together with the perineum. Now let's talk about the labia minora. So the labia minora, they are small tissues, or you just say, okay, yeah, they are small, they are very small, and they are found in between the labia majora. Now, they contain many sebaceous glands, and the cleft in between the labia minoras is called the vestibules. Now, that takes us to the clitoris. Now, what is the clitoris? Now, the clitoris has, should I say, almost the same significance or function with the male penis, that's with the penis. So why do we say that? It's because it has sensory nerves ending. Sensory nerve ending, that means it is sensitive to touch or anything. So it has sensory nerve ending, and it also have an erectile tissues. Now, erectile tissue, you know that the penis have erectile tissue. When a man is being aroused, you get the penis will be erected. So that goes to the clitoris. The clitoris also gets erected, so it has that erectile tissues. Now note that the clitoris does not have any reproductive significance, so it doesn't play a very vital role in reproduction. So that takes us to the vestibular glands. Now, what is the vestibular glands? Now, the vestibular glands is otherwise known as the Bartholin glands. Now, these Bartholin glands are found on each side of the vagina. And what is the main function of the Bartholin gland? It helps to secrete mucus to keep the vulva moist. So it secretes mucus to keep the vulva moist. That's why many people with Bartholin cyst, that's when that place is really inflamed, they find it very difficult to get wet, because once they go for a surgery and that Bartholin, that thing is removed, they can't possibly get wet again, because that is responsible for the secretion of mucus to the vulva area. Okay, so we talk about the hymen. Least I forget. So the hymen is a very thin sheet of membrane that partially covers the anterior part of the vagina. So many people that have hymen, that's for the virgins, they have hymen. So many people that have hymen, they have this difficulty in menstruation, because most times when their menses want to come out, it doesn't flow well because of the hymen blockage. So that is for the external genitalia. So we now talk about the blood supply to the external genitalia. What artery supplies blood to the external genitalia? So arterial blood supply is the pudendal arteries. So branches of the pudendal artery supplies blood to the external genitalia. Now, venous drainage is the internal iliac veins. That is the veins that drains blood from the external genitalia. Now, we now talk about the nerve supply. So the nerve supply is the pudendal nerves. So that moving forward, we are going to talk about the internal genitalia. So the internal genitalia lies in the pelvic cavity, and it comprises of the uterus. We have two uterine tubes, we have the two ovaries, and we also have the vagina. Now let's talk about the vagina. a lot of us know what is vagina. So let's talk about the vagina. So the vagina is a fibro muscular tube. It's a fibromuscular tube that connects the external genitalia with the internal genitalia. It's just like it's separate the external genitalia and the internal genitalia. So it is lined with stratified squamous epithelium. Then the angle of the vagina is 45 degrees. Now 45 degrees, that's extending from the bladder to the rectus, and that's the bladder in front to the rectus and the rectum and the anus behind. That is the degree. Now we talk about the length of the vagina. What is the length of the vagina? So the anterior wall of the vagina is 7.5 cm. That is about 3 inches. Now the posterior wall of the vagina is about 9 cm. So that's how long the vagina is. So now, what is the normal pH of the vagina? The normal pH of the vagina is about 4.9 to 3.5. So that's the normal pH of the vagina. Now during puberty, a bacteria will be present, and this bacteria is the lactobacillus. So what is the function of the lactobacillus? The lactobacillus secretes lactic acid to help to maintain the acidity, or should I say the pH of the vagina. Remember, there are two normal floras in the vagina, which is the lactobacillus and the candida albicans. So this lactobacillus is present from puberty, and it helps to maintain the pH of the vagina. So moving forward, we talk about the blood supply to the vagina. So arterial blood supply to the vagina is the internal iliac arteries. Then venous drainage is the internal iliac veins. Nerve supply to the vagina is the pudendal nerves. Now, what is the function of the vagina? So number one function of the vagina is that it acts as a receptacle for penis during coitus. Coitus means intercourse. So the second function of the vagina is that it has an elastic passage that enables the child to push through during childbirth. So that's the second function of the vagina. So now we now talk about the uterus. Now the uterus is a hollow muscular tube, and it is flattened anterior and posteriorly. That's anterior posterior. So it's flattened in the front and flattened behind. Now, location. So the uterus lies in the pelvic cavity in between the bladder and the rectum. So it is in the middle. The uterus is in the middle, the bladder is in front, and the rectum is behind. Now it weighs, that's the weight of the uterus, it weighs about 30 to 40 grams in adults. Now that takes us to the gross structure of the uterus. So the uterus has three parts. We have the fundus, we have the body, and we have the cervix. Now, what is the fundus? Now, the fundus is the dome-shaped part that lies across the opening of the uterine tube. So it's a dome-shaped part and lies across the opening of the uterine tube. Now, we now have the body. So the body is the main part of the uterus. The body is the main part of the uterus, and it continues to the cervix. So it continues like that to the external OS of the cervix, or you just say to the cervix. Now we talk about the cervix. The cervix is the neck of the uterus. So it's the leg of the uterus, and it begins from the body and it passes through the anterior walls, the walls of the uterine walls, and it goes downward and opens at the external OS. Well, let's talk about the microscopic structure of the uterus. So we have the perimetrium, we have the myometrium, and we have the endometrium. Now, the perimetrium is the branches of the peritoneum that spread to the surface of the uterus. So the branches of the peritoneum spreading across the surface of the uterus is the perimetrium. Now we have the myometrium. When you hear myo, you know that it's muscles. So we have the myometrium. This is the thickest part and is the middle part, and it contains of smooth muscle fibers. It also has it allows for the passage of blood, nerves, lymph, etc. Now we now talk about the endometrium. Now the endometrium is the inner layer, and it is composed of columnar epithelial cells. Now it has two layers. It has the functional layer, then it has the basal layer. Now let's talk about the supporting structures to the uterus. So if you look at the uterus, it has some structures that support it. So we have the broad ligament, we have the round ligament, we have the cardinal ligament, we have the uterosacral ligament, and we have the probiocervical ligament. So those are the structures that supports it. the uterus. Now we talk about the blood supply to the uterus. So arterial blood supply to the uterus is the uterine arteries. So venous drainage to the uterus is the uterine vein. Nerve supply is the sympathetic nerve and the parasympathetic. Now what is the function of this uterus we have been talking about? Now the uterus provide nourishment to the fetus, that's the unborn baby inside the womb. It provides nourishment. Then it also is site for implantation, because when we talk about embryology, you know that at a certain stage the embryo implants into the uterine lining, so it is a site for implantation. Then it also aids in contraction, so it contracts to enable the baby comes out during labor. Now another function of the uterus is that it shreds its lining, so it shreds its endometrium, and when it shreds that, it leads to what? Menstruation. So those are the function of the uterus. But let's talk about the two uterine tubes. So the two uterine tubes is otherwise known as the fallopian tubes, and this fallopian tubes lies at the upper ending, that's the upper side of the broad ligament, and extend from each side of the uterus to the fundus. So you can see it draws like that to and opens at the fundus. So it extends from each side of the uterus and opens at the fundus. Now at the final portion of this, that's the end, at the end of these fallopian tubes, we have finger-like projection, and these finger-like projection are called the fimbriae. Now we have the largest of all these fimbriae. So the largest of all these fimbriae is called the ovarian fimbriae. Now the length of the fallopian tube is about 10 cm. Now that takes us to the microscopic structure of the fallopian tube. So the microscopic structure of the fallopian tube is composed of the outer layer is composed of the peritoneum. So the peritoneum, that is the broad ligament, that is the outer layer. The middle layer is composed of smooth muscle fiber that helps in the peristalsis of the release egg. Now we now have the inner layer that is lined with ciliated epithelium. If you look into the fallopian tube, we have cilia. You know what is cilia? It's kind of hairy. So those are the epithelia that lines inside the fallopian tube. Now we now talk about the blood supply to the fallopian tube. So arterial blood supply is the uterine arteries, venous drainage is the uterine veins, then nerve supply is the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Function of the fallopian tube: number one, it conveys ovum from the ovary through a peristaltic and ciliary movement that's into the uterus. Now another function is that it aids fertilization. Remember that fertilization takes place in the ampulla of the fallopian tube, so it aids in fertilization. So now we now talk about the last internal genitalia, which is the two ovaries. So the two ovaries is the female gonad, that's the female gonad, and they lie at each side of the uterus, and it's also covered, or it lies at each side of the uterus in a shallow depression called the ovarian fossa. Now what is the length of the ovaries? So it's about 2.5 to 3.5 cm long. So we now talk about the microscopic structure of the ovaries. So the ovaries is composed of two microscopic structure. We have the medulla and we have the cortex. So now the medulla is the center part, that's the center of the ovaries, and it contains blood vessels, lymph vessels, lymphatic, etc. So now we now have the cortex. Now the cortex surrounds the medulla. It surrounds the medulla, and it contains ovarian follicles at different stages of maturity. I know that these ovarian follicles, each of them has their ovum. Remember that it's ovum that fuses with the sperm to produce zygote. So all these ovarian follicles have their ovum inside. So now blood supply to the ovaries: arterial blood supply is the ovarian arteries, venous drainage is the ovarian veins. The nerve supply is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Now we talk about the functions of the ovaries. So the ovaries release matured eggs during ovulation. So it also secretes androgens. So androgens are sex hormones. So the primary androgen, that's the primary sex hormones for female, is the estrogen. The estrogen that regulates ovulation, and the progesterone that regulates pregnancy and menstrual cycle. Now it also helps in the regulation of menstrual cycle. So that is the primary function of the ovaries. So we are done describing the female reproductive system from the external genitalia to the internal genitalia. So next on our list, we are going to be talking about the breast. Now the breast is an accessory organ of reproduction in the females. So the breast is otherwise known as the mammary gland, and it lies at the anterior part of the chest. It lies at the anterior part of the chest. So if you see in front of our chest, we have our breast. So it begins like it begins vertically. Vertically is like this. So it begins vertically from the second rib to the sixth rib. So this is how long our breast is. Now, what is the size of the breast? Now, the breast is hemispherical in shape. Sorry, that's the shape of the breast. So the breast is hemispherical, and we talk about the gross structure. So let's move over to the gross structure of the breast, that's of the mammary glands. Now we have two divisions under this gross structure. We have the external features and we have the internal features. Now let's talk about the external features. What we see out when you're looking at the breast, what do you see? We see the nipples, then we see the areola. Now let's talk about the nipples. So the nipples lies in the center part of the breast. It's conical in shape. It lies in the center part of the breast, and it is surrounded by the areola. So if you see that dark light, that dark brown thing that surrounds the nipples, that is the areola. Now it contains lactiferous duct. So what is lactiferous duct? This is the duct that enables secretion of milk from inside. That's from where it's being produced out. So it also have lactiferous duct. Now we talk about the areola. That's the areola. So the areola surrounds the nipple and it darkens during pregnancy. So when a woman is pregnant, that place that surrounds the nipple is always very dark. As for the external features of the breast, that is the nipples and the areola. So we now have the internal features or structures, gross structure of the breast. So we have the glandular tissue. When you hear gland, it secretes. So glandular tissue help in the secretion of milk. Now we now have the fibrous tissue that extends from the skin that's deep into the fascia. Now we now have the adipose tissue. When you hear adipose, you hear fat. So adipose tissue is the fat tissue that determines the size of the breast. So now you see some people have big busts, some people have small breasts. So it's depending on their adipose tissues. Okay, so now let's talk about the microscopic structure of the breast. So the functional unit of the breast is the lobes. So the breast is composed of about 15 to 20 lobes. So these 15 to 20 lobes now, they are now subdivided into, that's the breakdown, they are subdivided into lobes. Now these lobes contain alveoli that produces this milk. So the milk comes from the alveoli. Now from the alveoli, it further breaks down into the lactiferous duct. So the milk that is being secreted from the alveoli then goes into the lactiferous duct. Now from the lactiferous duct, it drains into where the lactiferous sinuses. So the lactiferous sinuses is a temporary reservoir for milk. So inside the lactiferous, that's why most pregnant women or most breastfeeding mothers, at some point you know that your breast is heavy. When your breast is heavy, you know that milk has drained into your lactiferous sinuses and it is much. That is the temporary reservoir. So you have to now press it out and give it to your baby. You have to express it out. Because that place is now full. So now that's the function of the lactiferous sinuses. And from the lactiferous sinuses, we have the lactiferous duct. Remember, the lactiferous duct opens to where the nipples, and that is where the milk is being expressed out. So we talk about the blood supply to the breast. So arterial blood supply is the mammary arteries. So venous drainage is the mammary veins. Then the nerve supply is the sympathetic nerve fiber. So now moving forward, we talk about the functions of the breast. Why do we have breasts? What is the function of the breast? So number one function of the breast, it helps in lactation, that is synthesis and milk production. Another function of the breast, it helps in the ingestion of milk, that's through the nipples. Another function of the breast is that it is a secondary characteristics of the female during puberty. So when from puberty, you see the female will develop breast. And the last function of the breast is that it plays a role in sexual attraction, because it's how you see the breast, you are attracted sexually to it. So it plays a role in what sexual attraction. So that is all for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope we have learned. We are not done with the female reproductive system because this is a very interesting topic. So we still have a lot to touch. So in my next video, I'm going to be talking about the menstrual cycle. I'm going to be talking about the menopause. I'm going to be talking about fertilization. I'm going to be talking about hormonal control of the menstrual cycle. I'm going to be talking about oogenesis, and of course, I'm talking about fertilization, and least I forget, I'm going to be talking about sex determinant. So how do you determine a child gender? So all that is going to be in my next video. So do well to like, share and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.